We need to keep pushing because we want to learn more about this car so we can take that into the winter and into the development of next year's car. Why the setup difference between George and Lewis this weekend, and in particular, why did we have a different rear wing on George's car to the one we had on Lewis's car? Well, I guess like every race weekend, we go in by doing an amount of work in the simulator, an amount of work to try and get the general balance requirements of the car right, work out what downforce level we want to run, work out where we're going to place our mechanical balance, our aero balance, just to sort of get ourselves roughly in the right window. So the two drivers did that programme before the Spa race weekend. In George's case, he felt that the bigger rear wing gave him some options. He preferred the balance of the car driving with that, so he elected to start the race weekend with that. And normally what happens is the two drivers sort of come together over the race weekend, but obviously this weekend was pretty wet. There was no dry running, and both of them quite liked the car they got, so elected to stay where they were. What happened with the communication between George and Lewis in the sprint qualifying? Well, in order to explain that, I think I first need to explain how difficult it is to get right in the first place. When you've got a track that's drying, it's nearly always the case that the quickest lap is going to be the very last lap of the run. And so your first laps are about getting a banker lap in, and then as you get to the end of the session, you want to be at the right place, so you're just about crossing the line at the end of the session with your tyres in the right window. So we were pretty much heading towards that, but what we could see was in the last corner, so in 18 and 19, where you sort of get to open the lap, there was a lot of queuing, a lot of cars there, and so we were worried about trying to get over the line before the session ended, and we were asking our drivers to speed up. They thought they had less time available than they really did, and as a result of that, we ended up with our two cars too close together. As it happened, I think a number of cars were disadvantaged. A number of the cars were far too close together, so we weren't the only ones that were struggling. Unfortunately for us, our two drivers tripping over each other pretty much meant that we didn't get the laps that we wanted and therefore didn't get the sprint qualifying result we really hoped for. As always, we'll go back, we'll review the footage, we'll review the radio communications, and we'll see what learnings we can extract, work out how we can improve for the future. And I'm definitely sure there's some learnings we can extract from this weekend. Why has the bouncing come back, and how much is it affecting the performance of the cars? We definitely had an amount of bouncing this weekend. Both drivers were telling us that, and we could see it in the data. We could also see an amount of bouncing on the other cars, and I think some of it is the nature of the circuit at Spa, and in fact we had huge amounts of bouncing last year, as did most teams. In terms of the performance, it definitely affects the performance of the cars because it affects the driver's ability to extract the maximum grip from the car, it affects their balance, and it affects their ability to get their braking points, etc. right. So that's definitely something we'll be working on for the future. The question we need to ask ourselves is how much of it is just the circuit we're at in Spa and how much is it to be found in setup, because obviously it was a wet race weekend, a weekend where we had no dry running up until the point we were actually racing. We'll also take a really good look at the upgrade kit and make sure we've not introduced bouncing with that, but at the moment our belief is it's probably a result of setup or the circuit itself. How are we fast on the single lap in qualifying but struggled more in the long run? Well, I guess that's an unusual thing for us. Generally we've got good tyre degradation and generally we do much better in the races than we do in qualifying. I think when you look at this weekend as a whole, the mixed conditions and the drying tracks that we had meant that qualifying was such that the sort of pace was changing lap to lap as the track dried up. The tyres you were running on were changing session to session, and so that sort of was probably more about what the driver can get out of the car than sort of getting to that sort of perfect point at the end of qualifying. I think both our drivers did an excellent job to sort of safely navigate through the weekends and put in good laps when they needed to put them in. I think in terms of the race pace, I think that is all about degradation, and to get the degradation you want, you've got to have the balance in exactly the place you want it. For us this weekend we weren't there, and I think that's just a result of not having dry laps in practice, not having enough opportunity to get the setup of the car just where you want it, and relatively we ended up with a car that wasn't quite as well balanced as maybe some of our competitors were, and as a result we had more tyre degradation and therefore weren't really able to extract the sort of race pace that we would like to have seen. What work is going to be done during the summer break and what can we expect for the second half of the season? Well, if we start with the summer break, we can't do very much at all. We're not allowed to by regulation. We're forced to take a 2-week break with no development of the cars, and I think for most of the factory that's going to be a well-needed break, something that actually probably helped them in the second half of the season when we need to bring all of that energy, bring all the upgrades we possibly can to the car. In terms of what we can expect from the second half of the season, we need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing because we want to learn more about this car so we can take that into the winter and into the development of next year's car. But also we want that fight for that second in the championship. So we'll keep bringing some upgrades to the car, keep fighting for that second position.